Welcome back to Senate Education, Friday, April 8th, 2:35. We have with us Representative Heidi Sherman of Stowe and Senator Richard Westman, Washington County.
Not yet.
Sorry. I feel like we're always doing this for Washington County in this committee. Memorial County.
He does everything for Senator.
I know. Thanks for being with us. You know the situation better than we do around what's happening in your district and what you're hoping for. So if you could start, and I'm not sure if it's best for the two of you or someone else, to just give us a situation on the ground, what's happening and the problem and really what needs to be done to fix it.
Because I need to get back to the program.
Sure, of course.
I just wanted to give you a little history in the kickoff of what the particular case around Stowe and the particular case around the Lamoille South Supervisory Union and the three towns that are there. Those communities, during the Act 46 process, those communities were in a position where they didn't want to merge. The secretary, it was one of the very few, if not the only case where the Secretary of Education recommend that they not be forced into merger. The State Board of Education voted 3-2 to force them to merge. They had a second vote on it.
The state board.
The state board, 2 votes switched. It was a 3-2 vote again. And the communities went into the process of going through the merger. But you have before you is the community of Stowe voted somewhat around 70% to come back at this issue and try to, and then both Morristown and Elmore have voted to agree to the separation in that. But it goes, and these are communities that without the merger worked quite well together in the Lamoille South District. And to my mind, it is them asking for this will not make them not work together. I think it will put each community in a better place to speak for itself. But this history of the state board flip-flopping, it being one of, if I'm pretty clear that this might have been the only district in the state where the board forced them to merge, that the secretary had recommended not to.
The Senator Westman, if I may interrupt, so 3-2 first was the forced merger, then the state board met again, and then it was
reaffirmed, but there was switch
reaffirmed to forced merge.
Yes, but there
I see.
but there were
I see, but still, okay.
and it was different people and they
I see.
switched. So there was a lot of, and it was not a great place to start off the footing in this.
Senator,
Do you know if a lot of these forced merger votes were split, or was this sort of stood out as one of the few split votes on forced mergers?
There might have been one other, but I think that this was the only place where the secretary, the board overruled the secretary. And if it wasn't, it was one of only a very, very few, which was, for the most part, the State Board of Education followed the recommendation of the secretary at the time.
so the merger was forced.
So the merger was forced, and you're here today, and all of the communities have supported this. Stowe voted 70% to support this in a separation, and you know, for the feeling and the support of those communities that have always, all three of them, been very good at supporting education. I think that I would like to see it honored, what the community has voted. And I think that House language that's in here goes does pretty much what we would like to do.
Which is, just remind us exactly what it is that you would like to do.
It's probably a good time for you to go with Heidi, and I will duck out and say, I'd be happy to work with you on your appropriation issues. And
I think this just got
and I would say that I'm happy to support recovery.
Thank you. I don't think we need to hear any more testimony.
We're all done. We're done.
Representative Sherman.
So thank you. And I just, I want to give my Stowe partners most of the time to speak. They've been involved with this since the beginning as former board members throughout this whole process. So, but I want to make sure you have a better understanding why we sit here today asking for this, in particular section 5. As Richie said, on May 11th, 2011, Stowe voted overwhelmingly to withdraw from Lamoille South Unified Union. On May 28th, the Secretary of State's office sent a letter to the other 2 LSUU towns, Elmore and Morristown, certifying that vote. And on December 7th, both Elmore and Morristown ratified the withdrawal of Stowe from LSUU. So now it's been over 16 weeks, 4 months, and since all of what is required by us under current law has been done, and we have yet to get a hearing in front of the State Board of Education, much less an approval from them. So just as background, we have studied the merger of Stowe, Elmore, and Morristown for 18 years. There were 2 major studies conducted by committees with representation from all 3 towns. Both of these studies determined there was no justification to merge. Student outcomes and equity would not improve, and there would be no cost benefit. When Act 46 passed, the 2017 AGS, the alternative governance structure proposal that was developed by Stowe and EMU had merged under Act 53 before. Elmore and Morristown had merged prior voluntarily. So that became 1 district then. And so Stowe and Elmore Morristown school boards created the AGS, the alternative governance structures, and they determined that we had 2 high-functioning, high-quality school districts under 1 supervisory union, and recommended that EMU and Stowe remain as such side-by-side school districts. Importantly, the AGS was supported by every single member of the school boards, both school boards at the time, the entire Lamoille County legislative delegation at the time, and most importantly, it was supported by the Agency of Education and recommended that it be approved. Ultimately, though, as Rich talked about, there was a lot of political maneuvering and a lot of politics went into this, and ultimately we were forced to merge. So in July of 2019, we merged. We became the Lamoille South Unified Union School District. Then last year, in accordance with state law and our articles of agreement, which were approved by all 3 communities, were voted on by all 3 communities, approved by the Agency of Education and the Board of Education, the voters of Stowe voted to withdraw. There's provisions in those articles of agreement that allow us to withdraw in year 2 or after. And the LSUU, as I said, voted, the other member towns voted to ratify it. We are now in front of we're not, we're now should be in front of the State Board of Education, but they have not taken it up because the Agency of Education has claimed, wrongly in our view, that their board does not have the authority to do so. We disagree completely for many reasons that we've presented over and over again. I sent you the letter that we had sent to Chair Olson, our legislative delegation. So you've seen that. But the board argues and continues to argue that they need the authority provided in state law to proceed. So that's why we're here. The only other avenue we have is a legal one. And obviously we prefer not to do that. That would not, however, be off the table, unfortunately, but we're trying to do this and proceed without that. And so section 5 would allow us to go in front of the state board and get that approval for our withdrawal. So as I've made clear here and to countless other people throughout the state, we have been through the Act 46 ringer for 5 years, over and over again. It is time for us to be allowed to move forward with our schools in a way that will best meet the needs of our students. And what best meets the needs of our students is to return to having 2 separate side-by-side districts under 1 supervisory union. The model that was working so well prior to our merger with high-performing districts and the model recommended by the agency those years ago.
So that's the plan, to go back to.
That is the
That's-
plan.
yeah.
Obviously, the combined school, the merged school board, our school board now is a school board. They haven't taken a position on this. I am confident though, and we are confident that it's the same office. The supervisory union is the same office as this unified union school district is the same office as had been the supervisory union. We have a new superintendent from when it was a supervisory union, but that superintendent is there, and I'm confident they will be able to do the work. And the agency, the school board can simply modify our AGS proposal, update it to what would be reflected now. There might be things that have changed that they might want to keep instead of going back to certain things, but the busing, for example, or something like that. But the AGS proposal is there. It was a solid, sound proposal. So it just needs to be updated by the school board.
Senator Person.
So the AOE said they had no opinion on this part of the bill, and I don't know if the board has an opinion on it. So did anybody in the House object to it? It seems like
So
I haven't heard any. Objection.
no, I mean, clearly, so I'm certainly disappointed that the agency said what they said, because again, we have been through this ringer with them for now years. They recommended that our AGS be approved, but then when it came down to it, they didn't seem to fight for it at all in front of the state board when it was having some challenges, when people were challenging it, other members of the state board. So that was disappointment. I had been under the understanding that they were going to support this. So I don't know.
But there was no testimony in the House against it.
There was no testimony in the House against it, as far as I know. I'm not in that committee, but as far as I know, there was no. And certainly the chair and vice chair and the Representative Conlon are big supporters of it. So
I would just say, you saw the letter from the AG's office where they said probably a court would say that they don't have it. So it seems like what we're doing here is just clarifying it for everybody to say it's a different process than you would do now. Like the board maybe should have just already met and approved it, but they're probably holding off because they know we're doing this and everything. So we just make it clear.
yeah. Yep. Again, we were disappointed in that letter from the AG's, but I guess we weren't surprised because they're hired. I mean, they support the agencies, and that's what they were. So we were disappointed, but not surprised, I guess, that they came out in support of what the Agency of Education is saying. We still think they're dead wrong, and we think we can win this case if it had to. But the important thing is actually, and this is where Jim and Lee come in, if I can turn it over to them. But this is really that students are, you'll hear about the capital needs as well. I think it's compelling both for students and for our schools in general. It's a compelling for all of our communities to be treated fairly, both Morristown, Elmore, and Stowe. So,
Senator Hooker.
No, just actually, I did have a thought, like, do you have reasons? Did the board give reasons for not approving?
Well, they never
So-
heard it.
I will
They
say,
wouldn't pick it up, yeah.
what we've heard today.
With the merger for making them?
Yeah. So there was a lot of, we were caught up in a lot of other communities' desires as well. We had an AGS proposal, other people had AGS proposals that weren't recommended by the state agency. We were caught up in a lot of different things, I think, that they didn't want to provide Stowe this opportunity, they didn't want to give it to Stowe. I think that was our kind of thought, that if they weren't going to provide it for other communities. But I will say that that if it's ironic, because Ms. Gleason, when she's talking about two things are ironic. Ms. Gleason, with regard to the State Board of Education, had they been doing any of the work that Kim Gleason talks about them doing now, the due diligence, the understanding that if educational opportunities are going to be lost, they wouldn't proceed. We made clear that educational opportunities were going to be lost if we were merged, and it didn't matter. So if they were gonna do anything that they're doing, if they had done any, it's a completely different board except for Chair Olson right now. But if they had done any of the things that Ms. Gleason has been talking about at that time in 2018, I think you'd find we wouldn't be here today. So the irony about the it shouldn't be harder to get divorced than it is to get married. We were just forced at the altar and then we can't seem to get rid of them. I'm like, geez, Louise, like, please.
So, for what it's worth, and I appreciate this, Ms. Russo Savage, the committee did ask the Agency of Education to weigh in, and we do have so in response to the chair's request, the Secretary of Education does support the House passed version of both the statutes and session law regarding withdrawal.
Okay. Thanks.
Senator Lyons.
I do have one question, and I'm gonna have to phone a friend about it too, because I can't remember what we said yesterday, that there's no timeline in here for the board to make its decision after all the paperwork goes in. So there's no date certain. And it sounds like it's almost repetitive of what's happened to you. So I'm wondering if there should be a date certain for a reply from the board where they have to say yes. I know they have to say yes based on this, but there's nothing that says when they have to do that. I don't know if you've looked at that.
Yeah, it actually, when it came up, I was like, oh boy, I don't want to be here next year. So I don't, that's a good question for Beth and the others, but I would like to make sure that there's something in there that makes sure that they proceed timely.
Okay. St. James is noting that. Thank you. Anything else for Representative Sherman? Representative Sherman, can you say a word about, has this been disruptive to the kids in that district, or have they been, I mean, their educational thing, I mean, we're not talking about, they haven't changed schools. They're not like going from one school now to the other.
No.
They've stayed, you know what I'm really trying to get at, because there has been a lot of this sort of ping pong back and forth.
So there's a couple of things to note, I think, in that regard. There hasn't been changes with regard to school, who's attending which schools.
Okay,
It's all the
yep,
same.
yep.
So that is, that's not the case. The curriculum and the various things have been impacted. And it's not completely a result of the merger, except that but for a merged board and not having your own school board, it wouldn't have. For example, Stowe got rid of its AP program in high school for an entire year. And that would never have happened had it just been a Stowe school board. People's Academy did not. Morrisville was still allowed to do it, but it would not have happened. And that was a huge hit for the students, the juniors especially, who count on AP. So that was a big one. And then you'll hear from when you get to Jimmy, but you'll hear from, there's a real capital capital needs challenge in Stowe. We have deferred our maintenance for many years because of Act 60, and we are in real trouble now. Morrisville is not, and so you're going to find bonds could very well not be approved, because Morrisville and Elmore would be responsible for, I think, over 55% of a bond for Stowe renovations. And that's a challenge. And we've got a school that has no walls. We've got that old 70s style school. My dad designed it, so I'm very proud of it at the time, but it's certainly not what is needed now in our education.
When was it built? No.
Yeah.
While we have Ms. Gleason, your name has been raised in this, and I just, for clarification, the state board does or does not support Section 5.
I'm sorry, I don't necessarily have the section directly in front of me, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. The section that's Representative Sherman is referencing.
No, we are supportive of the way that.
That's what I thought. I just want to make sure. Okay.
Yes.
Very helpful. Thank you. Thank you very
But I
much.
think with respect to timeline in consideration, I think that is different in the Stowe situation, in that we needed to seek the opinion to know whether or not we could take it up. So that I think that other requests have come before us in a timeline that is reflective of an agenda and schedule that we have as a board and as soon as possible, but have often required more than one meeting for consideration and questions and hearing from all parties affected. So I don't know that I have thought enough about the idea of a timeline. And I'm happy to come back with thoughts on that as well, or be
That'd be
responsive
helpful.
to what I think maybe better, being responsive to what you are thinking and having some time to think that through and how it would work for a normal schedule. And I think unfortunately Stowe's situation was different and shouldn't necessarily inform the consideration of a timeline.
Thank you. Mr. Brockhausen and Ms. Pelletier, I believe it's Mr. Brockhausen is up first, if that works for you.
Yes, that works for us.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
You have, we're gonna, hopefully about 5 minutes you have.
Yeah, so I'm going to change a little bit of my opening statements because a lot of this has been covered. I do want to, let me just say who I am. Jim Brockhausen. I was on the Stowe School Board from 2012 to 2019. So I've been involved with Act 46 from the very beginning. I was also on the committee that created the Articles of Agreement, which was the sticking point that I think Ms. Simmons sent a letter out that conflicts with our opinion. So the Articles of Agreement, if you go, and I forwarded you a copy on Lamoille South Unified Union's Articles of Agreement, and you go to page 8, I believe, you'll see Article 1, Paragraph C, Section 724, withdrawal by member town in year 2 or after, period. You should note that this was provided to us by the AOE, but it omitted the phrase voluntary or voted to be merged, or provide a disclaimer that this does not apply to a unified union school. That is the critical difference. And the folks of Morristown, Elmore, and Stowe voted on this on February 27th and approved it in good faith, believing what they've read is accurate. But it is different than what 724 says actually. So I think now in what has held us up from getting to quote unquote divorce court with the State Board of Education was the letter from Ms. Simmons saying that they did not have standing to hear our case. We believe we do because the very articles that were provided and required for us to have the folks vote on did not mention that we could never get merged. The other issue that I think that we found very troublesome is a lack of disclosure to the residents of Stowe, Elmore, and Morrisville. After reviewing statutes and attorneys' opinions, it becomes abundantly clear that our 3 communities had another, perhaps a more logical, perhaps even a better choice than even pursuing an AGS. As the laws are currently written, we could have voluntarily merged, take advantage of the tax incentives, and if the merger didn't work out, we could have simply voted to separate, and we wouldn't be in here today. Yet that option was never disclosed to us from the AOE or the Vermont School Board Association, who was providing regular guidance on Act 46 to all the school boards. We were strongly led to believe that the only way to maintain our successful school districts was the AGS pathway. Should those who drafted or helped draft Act 46 and the VSBA who provided school board guidance on how to navigate through Act 46 have told school boards, towns, and their constituents by pursuing an AGS would put at risk having permanent governance structure imposed on their town. Well, that's where we currently reside. I think that the Vermont legislature and the AG's office would frown upon such a major absence of disclosure of critical information, whether intentional or not. The lack of transparency is another concern that we have had in going through this process. So some in the Vermont education establishment believe that current law, we are permanently merged. They wrap their opinion around legislative intent, your intent. I find it quite unbelievable that the Vermont legislature intended these various nuances in the law were intentionally designed to be an obstruction to the Board of Education to even hear our proposal. I believe that your legislative intent is to be fair and equitable to all school districts, so they are empowered to provide students pathways for strong educational outcomes at a cost that the taxpayers value. In our community, we have seen numerous examples of students' educational quality standards deteriorating. I could probably list 5 or 6 right now. At the same time, in just 2 years prior to the merger, we spent $14,939 per equalized student. In our current budget year that we're in now, we're up to $17,069 per EQS. That spending increase in just 2 years is 14.3%. It is not sustainable. The communities of Stowe, Elmore, and Morrisville last year voted to allow Stowe to separate with the hope that Lamoille South Supervisory Union would once again become our governance structure. The voter turnout was very strong, and the community said in a loud voice, all 3 communities with almost 2 out of 3 voting for separation. Our communities understand that the merged districts are failing our students and taxpayers. Ask yourselves, what if the 2018 Board of Education got it wrong? What if the vast majority of voters in these 3 communities know something that they do not? I think the Vermont legislative intent was and still is to charge this board with the responsibility to ensure that our communities have the best practical plan in place, and would also expect the board to correct any possible past mistakes of their predecessors. In March, we met with the Board of Education. Mr. Olson, who was the only person present in 2018, did support our AGS. He asked for us to be patient and let the legislature provide a fix. On Wednesday night, WCAX covering H727 used the headline, "Bill could make it harder for Vermont towns to leave union school districts." I believe on Wednesday, Senator Chittenden expressed a similar comment about this bill. This is a tough bill and puts an unreasonable burden on community members. That said, we do appreciate Section 5 of the session law and hope that it can be passed out of committee and be approved by the entire legislature. Please remember, justice delayed is justice denied, and we have been delayed far too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brockhausen. Committee questions for Mr. Brockhausen. Ms. Pelletier, do you have a new information to share? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, just so you know.
I do. I'd like to go through the goals of Act 46 and where we stand with those now.
Please.
Okay. So to start with, I moved to Vermont with my husband and 3 children 13 years ago. And prior to that, I was a practicing attorney. Since moving here, I served on the Lamoille South Supervisory Union School Board, the Stowe School Board, and was a founding board member on the Lamoille South Unified Union School Board. Throughout our Act 46 discussions with the state, it was never in dispute that Stowe and Elmore Morrisville were 2 high-functioning, relatively large, side-by-side school districts, and the goals of Act 46 were being met. Looking at where we are now with the goals of Act 46, 1, provide substantial equity in the quality and variety of educational opportunities statewide. Stowe, Elmore, and Morrisville voted to dissolve the forced merger because we do not see an increase in equity or quality of our schools since being forced to merge. In my written testimony, I've provided 2 examples of quality and equity of offerings being jeopardized as a result of the forced merger. AP classes were eliminated in 2020 to 21 for one high school, but not the other, and reciprocity was not provided. Foreign language planning of additional classes at People's Academy was stopped, and we've had serious retention problems of our school leadership since the merger. We have taken steps back from equity, and none of the town schools are improved as a result of Act 46. The vote speaks for itself. The next 2 goals of Act 46 lead students to achieve or exceed the state education quality standards, and 3, maximize operational efficiencies with the goal of increasing the district level ratio of students to FTEs. It's impossible to make any determinations about these two goals. The Agency of Education has eliminated our school district's individual school performance data, resulting in our high schools losing their rankings by US News and World Report. And the most recent teacher-staff ratios on the Agency of Education's website are from 2019. It is impossible for the public or for you, the legislature, to make any determinations about whether these two goals are being achieved. Donna Russo-Savage just mentioned the education quality standards being included in the legislation as a measure when weighing the positives and negatives of mergers. And yet, how will determinations be made when those measures aren't publicly available? Shouldn't there be a report with data showing the public that the initial Act 46 mergers are working and that the goals of Act 46 are indeed closer to being met? Data is necessary for transparency and accountability. And so the merger has resulted in our school district failing the fourth goal of Act 46, promoting transparency and accountability. The Agency of Education is well aware of its lack of data problem. And even though this problem was brought to their attention 2 years ago, the problem still isn't fixed. Educational decisions have and continue to be made without any supporting public data. I ask the legislature to make data-driven decisions when it comes to the educational laws of Vermont. The last Act 46 goal, 5, cost savings. As Jim mentioned, since the merger 2 years ago, we went from spending $14,939 per equalized student to spending $17,069 per equalized student this fiscal year. This cost increase greatly exceeds inflation and state tax revenue increases over that time period. In my written testimony, I give one example on how the forced merger ended up leading to the elimination of our local bus company, and that resulted in the increase in our district's transportation costs by $221,456 per year, a 20% increase from pre-merger costs. The forced merger is a threat to the positive relationship that our towns have built over the decades of working together. While I know there is a perception in our state that Stowe is doing just fine, what many don't know is that Stowe High School does not have walls for its classes, but rather movable partitions. And Stowe needs significantly more capital improvements than other towns. From a school safety standpoint, I'm not sure how this is allowed. If a bond passes, the burden will fall on Morrisville and Elmore residents to pay for capital improvements that their students will not benefit from. How is this fair? Under the best circumstances, it's difficult to get a bond passed. But under a commingled voting structure where towns with different tax rates share the same budget that pays for schools that they don't share, it's near impossible. The legislative intent of Act 46 was to respond to shrinking enrollment numbers for small school districts. To be clear, Stowe and Morrisville do not fit within this model. Both towns are growing with significantly increased levels of new housing being built right now. There are no records anywhere that indicate that legislative intent meant for the Act 46 withdrawal provision to provide off-ramps piecemeal rather than equally to all school districts throughout the state. I ask that you allow this section of the bill to pass through so that there is clarity that you did not intend to distinguish between unified union and union school districts. Clarity is required to ensure that our governmental agencies apply Act 46 in a consistent manner that affords all of our town's residents with equal protection under the law. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from Ms. Pelletier? So I think we're going to be okay. I mean, no promises here, but I appreciate, we all appreciate the two of you taking the time. Certainly Representative Sherman, Senator Westman, and your soon-to-be Senator Perchlick are all here and without a doubt ready to be helpful in any way. So I think we can leave it there. And if we have anything, we'll find Representative Sherman.
Yeah, that would be great. And
Okay.
if I can provide anything, let me know.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't forget your water. Oh.
Mr. Senning, we don't see you yet. Any word for Senning?
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting.
My walls thing was worked out really well for me. Now I'm a legislator and I can do this and this.
It's loud. I've been in the school and it's surprising when you go in there how loud it is. You like, you're
Really?
thinking, yeah, because each
Because
classroom,
yeah.
it just has a divider. So it's
Yeah,
like, how
yeah.
does this work at all?
Well, right,
They used to be even more.
Mr. Fannin, we're going to shift to you. I don't see Mr. Senning yet. In the interest of time, why don't we go to you and then we'll make our way down our friends from the Principals, School Boards, and Superintendents Association. So with that, please go ahead, Mr. Fannin.
Sure, thank you. And for the record, Jeff Fannin, Vermont NEA, I think, and thank you for giving me a few minutes. Here's Will, right as I start. My comments, I think, will be brief. As I understood the committee discussion with Donna Russo-Savage earlier, with regard to H727, the reason I'm here is to talk about the concerns about employee transition language that we are working with the School Boards Association on right now. There's actively emails going back and forth. And as I understood the earlier conversation between the chair and Donna Russo-Savage earlier, I think we do need some time, perhaps early next week, we could get back to you. And hopefully we'll have some language that you could, that would be jointly presented that we agree to. There's just some details that we're not there yet, and I think we're close, but I think we just need to iron that through. That's my purpose for being here, is to talk about the employee transition language. We think it's necessary so that there's not chaos in the system and that schools have ample employees and where they are and people know what they're being paid and the terms and conditions of employment and all those things that are really necessary to operate a school. But it does require some agreement between both sides.
So just so we know, Jeff, so this is specifically related though to the sections that with the withdrawals and all that kind of thing. That's where you're concerned about.
Correct. When Act 46 was passed, and I forget the year now, there was language that protected employees in the transition, so that when schools did merge or were merged, I'll say it that way, however the case may be, the employees weren't left out in the cold. And likewise, when things are unmerging, as is the case, may be the case in some communities, we just wanted to make sure that schools had the employees that they needed to operate their schools, and that the employees understood what their terms and conditions of employment were, and they weren't thrown by the wayside or riffed or unnecessarily exposed in the transition. I don't think anybody wants that. I think we're all working in the same direction. We just there's some language does matter in this regard.
Absolutely. So I just want to mention to Daphne, so we'll have Mr. Fannin, and if you could make a note, maybe by Wednesday, would that work for you, Jeff?
I don't know. I hope so. I would hope. Yes. I mean, we're working with the school boards and their council, and we're trying to figure this out, and we're making progress. There's some questions that we have and they have, really.
Great. Senator Pershler.
Mr. Fannin, just to clarify, you support the rest of the bill other than that? And what you're saying about is nothing about the language in the bill, but the lack of language. You want us to add language. You don't want us to change language.
I think that it's necessary to add language to make sure that schools and employees aren't unnecessarily harmed. If you pass the remainder of the bill, if you will, and that's, I think everybody's intention is to make sure that the school system at large, if you will, can still operate effectively.
And you support the rest of the bill, other than the fact that it lacks that language.
I certainly think that schools and voters ought to be allowed to make their determinations. That's what we stood back when Act 46 passed. Voluntary mergers were really a good thing. And if that didn't work for them, I think that they should be able to structure themselves.
Are you purposely not taking a position? Or are you just answering in that way? Because that's the way lawyers talk. I mean, it's okay. You don't have to take a position.
Yeah, we're just.
Yeah, it's a good policy discussion to have. We haven't waded in on it thoroughly yet, Senator. And I think that we just want to make sure that if this is the policy direction you choose to go in, we want to make sure that folks and schools are protected.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Mr. Fannin, so are you speaking right now on behalf of your colleagues, Nichols, Siglowski, and Francis? Are you all working together? Is this really, or do we need to hear from each and every one of them right now?
I don't, on this issue, I'm not, we haven't, the answer is no, I'm not speaking on their behalf. I don't know that they would disagree with me, but I think you'd have to ask them. And I'm certainly they could send you an email if they do. We are working with them, the School Board Association most notably, and their council. And I don't know about.
I don't see Ms. Siglowski nor Mr. Francis on the screen at this point, so I was just curious. Okay, thank you. I think we can leave it there. We'll look forward to having new language that you're going to be working on with the School Board Association in particular.
Yes.
Great.
That's the aim.
Great testimony. Thank you.
I know it's not. No, I know it's moving quickly. We've been working on it.
I mean, we actually know. We know what we don't know because you've told us.
We don't know.
That's impressive. Well, I don't know how to take that. I'll accept it as a compliment, but I don't know if that's intended. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bannon. We appreciate it.
Take care, all. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Senning.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you guys see me?
No.
Not yet, no.
Okay. There you go.
Here we go.
It would help if I open my laptop that has the camera. Apologies.
No problem. We can see you now.
Okay.
Okay.
But now it will be the kind of annoying thing where it might look like I'm looking up above my screen instead of.
To be honest, we're not stressed about it. We're just wondering what you think of the bill.
Yep, and I can be very brief.
Okay.
And I'm happy to take questions too.
Great.
From the perspective of the Elections Division and the Secretary of State's office, we're fully in support of the bill, as you all have it in front of you. Just as a quick summary, I started working with myself and my staff started working with Donna and the AOE at least 3 years ago, maybe 4 now, on the language and provisions in this bill related to election administration in the union school districts. We were sitting around working tables with, like I said, Donna and her AOE folks and a bunch of the attorneys for school districts across the state and representatives from the VSBA and other statewide organizations to try and talk about improvements to Title 16 from my perspective as it relates to administration of elections in those districts. And this bill goes a very long way to bringing much needed clarity to the provisions in Title 16 that relate to election administration. I think it's the first sort of significant focused look at the union school district laws with an eye toward election administration and improvements that needed to be made. At a really fundamental level, I think you all know, the law has grown over time from a time eons ago when most school districts were just single town school districts. And there was forever a long time underlying provision, and I believe it still exists, that in that case, the town clerk was the school district clerk unless a separate clerk was elected. And my impression is, at least a lot of that was before my time here, but most of the time a separate school district clerk was not elected. And the town clerk just essentially functioned as the school district clerk also. However, of course, that was in the context of single town districts, that also made a lot of sense because the body of voters was the same between the town and the school. The election dates were typically the same between the town and the school. And so it just made sense and was not a lot of additional burden or responsibility for the town clerk to be the school district clerk. As the incidence of union school districts and unified union school districts have grown over time, that distinction and the parsing out of responsibilities in terms of election administration among the school district clerk versus the town clerks in the member towns of these union school districts got a lot less clear. And so at a really fundamental level, this answers some really basic questions about administration of elections in those districts, such as how many signatures are required for the various kinds of board members, depending on the board model, whether at large, town specific, or hybrid at large. So number of signatures, which voters in the district those signatures can be gathered from, where those petitions are handed in among the clerks in the district or to the school district clerk, who administers the absentee ballot process, sends out the early ballots, receives them back, and then ultimately how the results are processed, how the votes are counted. If they're commingled, which is a decision that the districts make themselves in their governing documents typically, or have until now, how that commingling takes place, where the ballots are commingled, when that can occur. So it answers a lot of those questions. I don't think you have the interest for me to go into the details of all of the various iterations, but the way
Well, I'm going to pause just for a moment, Mr. Senning, because we are interested in jumping into some of this. Senator Chittenden.
Well, it's nice to see you. We've exchanged so many emails that never actually had a Zoom with you, so it's a pleasure. So I actually have some questions about commingling and also on the 60% threshold. So as thrilling and as articulate as our legal counsel has been on this walkthrough of 727, I see language in here where at times it seems to mandate the commingling of votes in a school district. My question to you is, are you against making it clear that districts can have the choice to commingle as a guiding principle in this language?
No, I really would defer to the committees for that question. I think it's a policy question. I think that either method can be effectively administered.
As a quick follow-up, so I want to make clear that I'm not missing something as to the merits of forcing commingling. I see value in allowing school districts, if they so desire, to put school questions on the same ballot as another municipal ballot, so as the tallies of the votes would be collected and are counted in different towns and then tabulated electronically, which would not commingle the votes. Is there any counterpoint that you've heard that there's a reason to force them to have a separate school ballot, to then put them in the back seats of cars after a long day of elections, to shipped all across the school district to a central location and then processed at 9 or 10 p.m. after working 12 hours earlier?
Couple things. Again, the policy side of that question, the argument that I'm aware of, the interest in commingling generally is to not pit member towns against each other in the essence of you voted no on this particular item and we voted yes on this particular item, and instead only ever getting a whole district result. That's what I understand is the primary goal.
Yeah, please.
And as the chair raised the other day, do you also see a counter argument to that as a right to know, so to speak, how towns voted in different ways, and also for the financial efficiencies and time efficiencies of allowing ballots to be captured in each of their towns?
Not necessarily. And I say that, and that you give me a chance to follow up on the rest of your question, which is that it's important to understand, and I think aside from those of us like me who have to think about elections 24 hours a day, we have to remember that these are really two different municipalities, the town and the school district. And honestly, what I talked about before, where it was, single town districts, is where that tradition, I believe, of literally having the articles on the same ballot sort of started and has hung on. I think for many different reasons that are reflected and tried to be addressed in this bill, we need to start thinking of these elections really as separate. And I think it's just going to be the case less and less moving forward that the two will be combined on a single ballot.
Yeah, please.
And so just for clarity's sake, I hear that point. Are you officially against at least having the language be permissive to the school districts to allow non-commingling and to give them the choice between either forcing commingling or allowing the ballot questions to be on individual town ballots?
No, I would say I'm agnostic about that. Yeah, I would make one further point. There's a pretty important provision in here that generally applies when ballots are being commingled, that it allows for the counting of those ballots to take place over a 24-hour period, which addresses your concern about the 9:30 at night trekking to the central location to conduct the count at 11 p.m. And that's what I hear the most concern about. And that was a bit of a step for me and our office in general, because it's the first time I'm aware of that we've expressly allowed for the counting of votes to take place into the next day after an election.
Separate topic?
Yeah.
So,
Well, actually, did you want to say anything on
Yes,
this?
I did want to, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, the comment that you made that the districts are a unified group of voters, so we would see a unified result. If we separate them out, we're separating the district apart. And kind of the analogy for that is, when we have Senate districts, we're a unified Senate district and we don't separate towns out. We do see the town vote, but yeah, but so it was really a comment. So I'm on the other side of the fence.
On the combing, I just wanted to flag for St. James that we had a question on whether there was a conforming of this commingling, because there is this one section that requires these town votes to be counted, but if they're commingling, how could they do that?
What page is?
This is page 10 on chunk 2. Because the subsection C there, you have to have a majority of the voters living in each town within the district, including the petitioning town. So you have to have the majority of if there's one or more towns, you have to know from each town. So if they're required to commingle, but then they're required to know the towns, they're gonna have, I guess they could still do a central location and count the towns, but I don't know. That was a question we had. I don't know if it's squarely in the hands of Lynch Council.
Where is that?
C, line 4 to 8. Chunk
Excuse
2.
me, I was looking for a raise hand function, and I'm sorry that I couldn't find it.
No, perfect, go ahead.
Would it be okay if I responded to that?
Only for
In the commingling provision, there are several exceptions to it. It's the default, but there are several exceptions. The first is if Vermont statute explicitly permits or requires a different method of counting a specific type of vote. The second is related to the proportional to town method. The third is if the articles of agreement that were approved by the voters before July 1, 2019. So that's basically all of the current UUSDs that we currently have a different way of going forward. So this is already is saying going forward, if you have a new one, you don't have that choice if you have a new school district. But the school districts that are formed now that put something in their articles of agreement that they didn't want to commingle do not have to commingle under this.
Okay.
And also there is the provision that if the statute provides otherwise, it doesn't have to be commingled. So that answers your question, Senator Pershing.
Does it? Oh, because of this statute says you can't commingle to meet that requirement. That's what
Exactly.
Yeah.
Senator Chittenden.
So on this commingling piece, I would just, as we go back through to finalize this, I hope that the language doesn't force South Burlington, which has 4 different districts, to have a separate school ballot every time. Because right now we see how each district votes on our school budgets. And I hope the language doesn't mandate that we have a separate school ballot every time, but I have a separate topic that I'd also like to use.
The same
It wouldn't
municipality.
mandate it, would it?
If it's the same municipality,
Mr. Sunny, did you hear the question?
I did.
Or
I
not.
believe it's answered by what Donna was mentioning. If that's the existing method in that existing district, the mandate for commingling is only prospective for new districts that might be created.
I'm still of the mind that I'd love to know what the committee thinks about at least allowing the commingling, but maybe that's a conversation for next week.
It might be a question for next week. It also might end up being a question for government ops.
Yeah.
But if you want to work on an amendment related to that, yeah, go for it. And we would I have a feeling it would end up down the hall. Ms.
May I
Russo-Salvi.
I just wanted to check, South Burlington is not a unified union school district, is it?
no.
No.
So it's not covered by this.
Okay, so it's not covered by this.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you for that.
We don't.
You're welcome.
You never have to
Because you don't have-
commingle. You never.
Maybe
have-
are those results among the wards in South Burlington? Do you have
We have
wards?
legislative districts. We don't have wards, we have legislative districts.
Your rep districts. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Senator Chin, do you have a follow-up related, please? Go ahead.
Not related.
Okay, unrelated.
Ready for the next one, Will?
Sure.
All right, so I'm looking at page 74 of the full bill of the 171 pages, where it speaks to the withdrawal proposal shall proceed to a vote in each of the other towns within the union district if approved by at least 60% of the union district voters residing in the petitioning town. My question to you is, with the frequency and the staggered voting that this whole process will involve, I'm concerned that 60% of a really low turnout election will be questioned, or the legitimacy will be raised or questioned. I also have heard that, or we were presented that Springfield has a charter dictate that a certain threshold of the total voting populace must actually vote in the election for it to count for a charter change. Do you have any opinion on a 60% threshold absent a voting turnout threshold? Is there merits to weigh a requirement that the voting turnout has to meet a certain point as opposed to just those that do show up meeting a higher threshold?
Did you get all that, Will? I think so, and it's a good question. If I remember the provision right, it is as you described, so it's just saying 60%, but it's not requiring a certain number of voters. And I think maybe the way you read it, Beth might be able to help too, but I had helped with language there to make that clear that it was 60% of the voters who are voting, because I think the alternative, you wouldn't want to require 60% of the voters to actually vote yes. Because I think you could run into having a real hard time getting to that kind of turnout number every time. Couple things, if this provision were to go into effect, it would be, to my knowledge, the only place I'm aware of that requires more than a majority vote in our election law to pass something. And the second part of your question, yes, there is some language I could point to you. It's in the context of reconsideration votes in municipal elections, where it essentially says that to go the other way, to reconsider an article and vote, have the opposite result when you reconsider it, you need to have at least 2/3 of the people who voted for the prevailing side on the first vote. And you need a majority. So that would be the other approach you could take, is just what you were describing, to say I need a certain percentage. I think I would suggest, I like the way that statute is phrased, where it's a certain percentage of those who came out the first time rather than a certain percentage of your actual total registered voter number. But that certainly would be an option. But the way it's written now is requiring a 60%, voting yes, not just a simple majority, but more than a simple majority.
I wonder, Will, if you recall, I think pretty sure that Burlington has a 60% threshold on some bonding votes in their charter.
Could be in their charter. I do not know all the charter provisions.
60% of the voters have to show up.
No,
Oh,
60% yes, or else it doesn't
It has
pass.
to be more than a majority.
It's not unfair.
Senator Pursley.
Yeah, I was concerned about the 60% as well. I also think this wording is strange, but I don't know if you could do the,
You're on 74.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, page 11 of chunk 2, the same section that Senator Schindler just read. In that, you couldn't say of the voters that voted before, because there isn't another vote that they have. This is just a withdrawal vote. They didn't have a vote to join. I mean, maybe, I don't know, can't remember what section we're in, but otherwise, I think that is a good, I like it the way it is for reconsideration for town, but I don't think that's an option here.
So I don't know if I made it, sorry.
No, please.
I just don't know if I made it clear, but my worry is in my municipal experience, when we have these off-cycle elections, the fewest number of people show up. So this is going to be 60% yes of a very engaged electorate,
Small
which
minority.
small minority. That's my concern.
That's what happens in democracy. It's really.
Yeah, no.
They care, they'll vote.
We haven't been able to force people to vote.
They're always willing, always, of course, welcome to bring any kind of amendment to us or down.
Since you pointed out there's no previous election, I suppose the only other alternative would be what I was talking about, of some percentage of the actual registered voter total. But then I think you just want to be really careful where you set that, to not end up in a position where you have to have 5 or 6 elections in a row trying to get people to come out.
St. James, other questions for Mr. Senning that we had
Let kids vote.
flagged?
16-year-old.
16-year-old.
I think most of your questions are around commingling and the 60%,
Yeah.
which you seem to have fleshed out. I think, let me just see here. Okay. Unless the committee can remember something I'm not seeing.
No.
Oh, you had a question about the study committee, and I don't know if this would be a question for Will, but you had a question about the study committee process and withdrawals,
Start.
and whether a subcommittee of the Union District Board, so not the town that wants to withdraw, but everyone else, having a
Right.
subcommittee was consistent with what happens when municipalities divorce.
Mr. Senning, is that a question that you can answer? Is it consistent with what happens when municipalities divorce? Ms. Russo Savage, is that something you can answer?
No, I don't know how that works.
Yeah, Senator Chinden.
So I raised this one as well. I just really wanted to get you in here, Will, and talk to you on a Friday afternoon. My concern is Essex Junction recently separated from the town, from the whole previous municipality of Essex. And the biggest complaint against it is that the town never voted on it. So what I'm seeing here is inconsistent with what we just allowed as a legislature. We are putting up a ton of hurdles to allow a school district to dissolve. I think I can rationalize it with my constituencies by saying that the school funding in this state is so interconnected, and that we all have a responsibility that you have to have the entire school district weigh in on the divorce, as opposed not with a municipality. But I'm just looking for other precedent or examples or considerations of how a city municipality is distinct and different than a school district when it comes to divorces.
And I'm sorry, I'm just not much help because I'm not very familiar with that process.
Could you come back to us in an email?
if somebody could put a specific question to me, yes.
Okay. Well, do you want to ask it again? I mean,
I can send you a note, Will. I'll do that afterwards.
you sure?
Okay.
Okay.
I just want to use everybody's time.
No, it's a good question. I thought the question was clear, but we can certainly put it in an email to you, and you can get back to us. Anything else at this point for Mr. Senning? Thank you for being with us. Very much appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll have you in again before too long.
I'll get back to
Mr. Nichols.
updating your legislative maps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nichols, anything you want to say at this point on this bill?
Yeah, just to, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association, just maybe like 5 minutes worth of comments. Thanks for letting me testify on this. Coming to you today wearing several hats, as a former superintendent, principal, and most importantly at the VPA, looking at this ultimately through the potential impact on kids. So here are the points I'd like to make. The first one is that in the final version of the House bill passed, each town has to have their own petition with 5% to start the withdrawal consideration process, which makes more sense than the original plan, which was just 5% of the voters in whatever town wanted to leave. In my opinion, that's still too low a threshold. And some of our smaller communities, that 5% could really be an extended family. I'm also worried, and I heard you guys talk about this a little bit, about the withdrawal study committee, who's supporting them. Is this going to end up being extra work for central office and school administrators that right now can barely keep their heads above water, as well as volunteer board members who may already be overwhelmed? I don't see that anywhere in the bill. Perhaps I missed it. I'm also worried about the morale impact and the disruption factor for school leaders and teachers who already have too much to contend with if they're having to worry about a separation agreement. I have no problem with the concept that if the state board makes a positive recommendation supporting withdrawal, that they issue an opinion recommending approval of the withdrawal proposal and that this ultimately goes to the voters in each of the affected towns. I do, however, have a major problem with the process continuing if the state board determines that a withdrawal is not in the best interest of the students involved, both within the town looking to withdraw as well as the students that are left behind. If the state board reaches the conclusion that withdrawal is not appropriate with the goals of Act 46, that should end the process from my perspective. The state board needs to protect the students, and sometimes this might be at the expense of the personal feelings of adults in the community. No unified union school district or supervisory union, in my opinion, should be required to provide services for a town that withdraws from a merged district if the state board has determined that the withdrawal is in conflict with the goals of Act 46. And finally, and this has been mentioned by a few other people, I think, in certain different words, the state, in my opinion, has a compelling interest to provide high quality public education for Vermont students. This has been established in legal decisions such as Brigham, in laws like Act 60 and Act 68, and indeed judicial rulings based on constitutionality. Allowing towns to pull out of a district without clear proof that the move will benefit the students in question is against the best interests of students and thus against the compelling interests of the state of Vermont. And that's all I would really say on this. And if you have questions for me, that's fine. And that's it really.
Any questions for Mr. Nichols? Jay, really appreciate it, and we'll probably have you back in as we make our way through it, over this coming week. Thank you. Ms. Siglowski, as you know, you may know that we did hear from Mr. Bannon, who said that he was working with you on some language as it relates to protecting employees as some of these withdrawals move forward. Is there anything else that you'd like to say at this point?
On that particular topic or the bill itself?
Either.
Okay, I just have some very brief comments. Sue Siglowski, Executive Director of the Vermont School Boards Association. And my brief comments have to do first with Section 724B1, which covers initiation of the process and requires the voters residing in the petitioning town to submit petitions to the clerk of the Unified Union School District, and also requires individual petitions to be signed by at least 5% of the voters residing in each of the towns within the Union School District, with each town having its own petition. Our position on that threshold to initiate the process hasn't changed since we testified in the House Education Committee on the state board's proposal.
And that position is that the threshold of 5% of voters is too low to begin a significant and time-consuming process. There's a concern that the equity work of unified union districts may be jeopardized by this low threshold, and that a small group of people who are opposed to equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives may use this process to derail those types of initiatives and other centralized initiatives. So on that point, we would recommend consideration of a higher threshold, such as requiring a higher percentage of voters to sign the petition, or requiring a preliminary vote in all of the member towns on whether to initiate a withdrawal study. And then the only other two brief comments that I have, the first one, it has to do with the proposed supervisory union board representation language, which you spoke about a little bit earlier with Ms. Russo-Savage, and that is in section 719C of H 727 as passed by the House. The SBA supports that language based on a resolution passed by membership, which calls for the General Assembly to examine the laws governing supervisory union board structure and the process for waiving the statutory requirements for SU board structure or composition, taking into account issues of fairness, equity, and funding. So we do support that language. We also support the language in section 731, which you spoke about earlier, which it has to do with the process to fill vacancies on Unified Union School District Board. And we also have a resolution passed by our membership, which supports the school board appointing a person to fill that vacancy in consultation with the select board. So we support that existing language. And that concludes my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Haglowski, do you have anything to say about, did you hear Mr. Fannon's testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have anything to say about that? Confirm or deny your cooperation?
Yes, I'm confirming that we are working together on that. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, thank you, Ms. Zaglowski. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
So committee, we have a number of things in front of us related to this. Oh, Mr. Francis, did you want to say something?
I would love to.
Okay.
And like my colleagues, I will be brief. Jeff Francis, Vermont Superintendents Association. How is my audio? Is it okay? Okay, good. So my comments are thematically consistent with what you heard from Jay Nichols and Sue Zaglowski. I've been interested in listening to the committee deliberation around how much is enough in terms of process associated with a withdrawal from a unified union district. And the summary points that I would like to make is some of the comments that you've heard today notwithstanding, superintendents in general who are working in unified districts are seeing the benefits. So there are gains being made in the educational process consistent with Act 46 that were anticipated under the law. And I think that's significant. It paused superintendents in the numerous discussions that we had about this when the House was deliberating it to really draw attention to a couple of points, which have been mentioned by Mr. Nichols and Ms. Zaglowski. One is, how do you establish the threshold for voter approval? And as Senator Chittenden pointed out, with a 5% petition and a vote which is characterized by a lot of energy on one side of the issue, you really do run the risk of finding yourself in a process which is really quite disruptive from a procedural standpoint, based on a action of a few. And I appreciate the comments about the democratic process. I want to come back to that. Something else that the superintendent's noticed is the potential for resource demands on the central office. Because even though the current version of the bill speaks to, it doesn't assign responsibility to the central office to support the analysis that would be done by the study committee that would be formed up. It really, I think, nearly by definition necessitates that interest in one of two ways. Either the central office staff will be called on to participate in that analysis, which is a time-consuming analysis, or they will feel compelled to because they're going to want accurate information provided to voters. And that was stated to me just that way. Either we're going to be asked to engage and support the analysis, or we're going to have to follow the analysis that's done by folks that are conducting it because we want to make sure they get it right. So that was another concern. And then the final point that I wanted to make, which has also been touched on in your committee, is Act 46 was intended as a purposeful piece of legislation that was enacted by the General Assembly, who frankly needed to elevate it to the legislative level because after many years in the state of studies of the benefits of unification and two predecessor bills, 153 and 156, that were both acts that were intended to induce local electorates to move to voluntary unification on behalf of the public education delivery system, and most especially the kids that it served, not enough action was happening. So the General Assembly took it upon themselves to pass Act 46, and they in effect said, we are going to take responsibility for movement that we believe needs to occur in the education delivery system. And by definition, that's what the legislative process is. I mean, we could take a look at the bills that you're examining just this session. And I think to a person, the senators would say, we need to do this at the state level because we have concerns about it locally. So my main point, and it's my closing point, is there is a balance that needs to be struck here. And it doesn't necessarily have to be sort of an equilibrium. The General Assembly took responsibility for inducing unification under Act 46. And you should not go, in my mind, too lightly into what is necessary in the process of a deunification. And that's where the concern about what the petition number of names on the petition is, what the vote composition should be. All of the processes that are in this bill can be either rigorous enough or less rigorous. And if they're less rigorous, you really do, I think, have the potential to thwart the underlying intentionality of Act 46. I'll leave it at that and answer any questions if you have them.
Any questions at this point relating to Mr. Grant's testimony? Okay, I think we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Holliday, you've been very patient. I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, I just need to take 5 minutes, and we're going to come back and we'll spend 15 minutes with you, and that'll be our wrap for the day.
That's fine. Take your time.
Thank you. Cool. I just need to get my